$190,000 below that as a starting point for our 2010 budget. The local receipts and the decline in local receipts is really unprecedented in Massachusetts. I've been doing this for a few years, and I can't think of many years where we've started off with such a gloomy outlook, but it is reality. And as I mentioned it before, we're experiencing declines in our motor vehicle excise tax, our licenses and permit fees, and department revenue. I just want to point out an interesting example that under the local receipts, motor vehicle excise tax represents the biggest portion. And if you look at our motor vehicle excise tax collections in recent years, they've been fairly consistent in terms of the increase. We're projecting that we would be at a level last seen in about fiscal year 2002. So all of the growth that we've experienced in this revenue category is being lost, and we're rolling back to an amount that would be approximately 8 years prior. So it is significant, and people will want to know why. It is because just the sale of new vehicles is not out there, and the town's motor vehicle excise tax is directly linked to the sale of new vehicles. Additional note, the town will continue to base its fiscal year 2010 revenue estimates on what is the most conservative revenue assumptions. And as you know, there are dire consequences in taking an aggressive approach to revenues, and that dire consequence is potential revenue deficits. So we don't have the ability to run a revenue deficit. The federal government can run a revenue deficit, the state government can run a revenue deficit, but the town of North Reading cannot run a negative or a revenue deficit. So best available forecast for state aid at this point is as a result of the estimates that have been put together by staff, but more importantly have also been put together, reviewed by the policymakers, which is the Board of Selectmen, the school committee, and the finance committee. They're reflective of a collaborative effort of bringing our finance and our leadership team together. As of the start of the budget, we've estimated a 5% reduction in state aid. That 5% reduction in state aid translates to about $435,000. So on top of the losses that I've already mentioned, take off another $435,000 for state aid. I mentioned that the state aid could reach 10%, but those would be based upon reductions which have not yet been proposed by either the governor or the legislature, but they are very realistic. You've seen Mr. DeMasi make his comments in the Boston Globe. We're cognizant of that. We're aware of that. We're kind of keeping our eye open for it. And 10% would simply just double that amount that you've seen from $435,000 to about $870,000. The state aid estimates are typically released by the governor in January. So the House 1 budget comes out in January, and that's our first look to see what the revenues are going to be, state aid revenues are going to be for the year. I would assume that those numbers will be stark in terms of what they propose to provide cities and towns in the Commonwealth. Going forward, revenue projections will be revised based upon the state aid numbers that are included in the governor's budget. We'll continue to monitor our local receipt collections. We're especially interested in our 6-month benchmark, which is for the period ending December 31st of 2008. So that's kind of the key number for us at the end of this month. A couple weeks, probably in about the middle part of January, we'll know what our December 31st collections were. We can react to that if they turn out that they are better or worse, but it is something we will look at. And then the third thing that we need to look at in terms of potential budget revisions going forward is the uncontrolled expenses, and I make special note of snow removal, which could be reduce next year's available revenues and impact amounts for free cash on July 1 of 2009. Other new revenue items that we include in the budget, positive, we do have $120,000 budgeted for Berry Center new growth. Other new growth is historically low. We had originally put in $150,000. The assessors are indicating to us that they expect that number. That is the most optimistic number. Potentially that number could be down to $125,000. We just need to keep that in mind, and that is based upon what I consider to be a remarkable decline in new construction activity in North Reading and throughout the Commonwealth. New growth revenues are a true benchmark of economic health, and they have greatly benefited the town in its ability to pay for services. But when that revenue source is not there, it does cause us a number of problems. The preliminary budget doesn't anticipate use of any free cash. I would reiterate what has been said many times, that free cash should never be used to balance the budget. It's unpredictable. It may not be available. Some towns do expend free cash and apply it toward their budget. I think that would be a mistake. The town will indeed be fortunate to have any free cash available at the end of the year, because when all of our surpluses and deficits are added up, if we find out that we didn't collect what we thought we were, then those numbers will ultimately result in free cash being reduced or eliminated in their entirety. As a positive note on the revenue side, we are looking at other new funding sources that could potentially be applied toward the budget. We're scouring our old accounts. We're going back and looking at things that perhaps we can fund through some of the alternate means that might be available to us. I really can't offer too much in terms of specifics, but I can tell you that we are diligently trying to go through and scour out and clean out any old accounts that may exist. Some of these monies can be used for things such as debt service. We could use it potentially to put down our debt service number. So on the expense side, you have a summary of what the numbers look like for each department, and I won't get into the detail on that, but I'll tell you that the town does not have any labor contracts that have been settled for fiscal year, that extend beyond fiscal year 2009. That's good news. It's good news in terms of the fact that we're not stuck with large labor contracts that we can't afford. But it is difficult at this point to pinpoint what the impact of any contract settlements might be on the fiscal year 2010 budget. The salary pool account is shown with level funding, and that really translates that there will likely be very little money for pay increases in the new fiscal year. We just don't have the ability to pay. There are a total of 7 contracts that expire on June 30th of 2009, and additionally we have 2 contracts that remain unsettled for the current fiscal year, and that is the DPW union and the Superior offices. North Reading continues to search for answers with all cities and towns on the fixed cost portion of our budget. Some things that really stick out and have really caused us problems in recent years is the regional school assessment. You recall a couple of years ago, the regional school assessment went up by $150,000 with no advance notice. A pension number and retirements and employee benefits, and especially employee benefits as they relate to health insurance. All of our employee benefits, which includes pensions, retirements, and such, health insurance, we project to increase about 8.6%. You can see that that's gobbling up all available funds that we have. And I would say that the greatest opportunity to achieve cost savings and continue the high quality of services with the public would be in the area of health insurance and employee benefits. The budget does not reflect any savings that may be achieved as a result of participation in the GIC health insurance plan, or does it address any health insurance plan design modifications such as co-payments, deductibles, and these things, as we know, are very common in the private sector, but less common in the public sector. I do believe that participation in the GIC or plan modifications to the existing plan are a critical component in moving toward a balanced budget for 2010. So to wrap up, the proposed budget does provide for a decrease in the level of services offered by our departments to meet their legal obligations and continue their funding, or continue their operations at what I would call stressed levels. Impacts on staffing in the form of layoffs are less clear. And the reason why they're less clear is we have a hiring freeze that's in effect right now, and that will remain in effect through the end of June. and we're hoping that we will achieve significant cost savings by not filling vacant positions and therefore minimize layoffs. However, realistically, when you're facing a budget gap between 1.7 and $2 million, there will be layoffs, and we should not be kidded in thinking that there will not. I guess what is clear at this point is without the assistance of our employees and labor, we need to find new and creative ways to fund employee benefits. The town will need to cut back on its services, and the public has grown to expect and appreciate these services. Many of the departments have reached a stage where across-the-board reductions will adversely impact the quality of services. No quick and easy answers to any of this stuff. However, we do know that the budget dilemma the town is facing for next fiscal year is quite different than anything I've seen in the past. It's real, and it's scary. Good management and sound business practices can only go so far, and they fly in the face of the multitude of obscure laws and regulations that stifle new and creative good government solutions that the public now demands of us. And I think that that's really important to note, that we would love to be creative, but in many respects we're straddled by laws that require us to act in certain ways and follow certain procedures that on the outside seem quite achievable, but the devil is in the details, and I can assure you that the details are quite lengthy. The budget deliberation process that begins next month will additionally require additional time, patience, and respect amongst all parties to complete. As a final note, I would urge the board to consider delaying action on the budget as late as possible into the spring. I think that this is a year that requires us to spend as much time as we possibly can on the critical budget decisions that do need to be made, and I thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Greg. Just, our next board meeting is scheduled for January 5th, and we have scheduled the first budget hearing for Saturday, January 10th. Police, fire, and public works, not necessarily in that order. Is that correct?
8 a.m.
No changes on the plan there.
DPW brings the food, so they get to come on first.
And budget books will be available roughly when?
About 2 weeks, so we'll have them out well in advance of that meeting to be reviewed.
Meaning that we basically will get them at our next board meeting or before?
Or you get it before?
Before.
Are we going to have any of the smaller budget departments coming in on the 5th, or are we going to put them off until after the other ones? You know?
You and I, just as a reminder, when you and I talked, we talked about maybe doing that. But, I mean,
Traditionally, that's what
going through the department budgets from the point of view of understanding, what they're looking for, where they're going, is no real impact on the revenue. I mean, the revenue is what it's going to be, and we'll have to adjust accordingly. So we don't need to delay that portion of it. The struggle will be when we arrive at numbers that we're going to use, and the impact.
The struggle is funding it. No, I didn't know if we were going to start the budget session on the 5th with some of the smaller departments. Try and get through that earlier rather than later.
Yeah.
I agree. I thank you, absolutely.
Anything else?
That's all I have.
Thank you for the summary. I think we're all pretty much no surprises. There was an interesting article I was reading. I mentioned it to a couple of board members earlier, that, and it could come back and have some impact on our solid waste program. And that is that there's a buildup now of recyclables because of the cost and of energy coming down, and the demand going down. A lot of the recyclable paper that used to be put putting a ship hauled overseas to China or reprocessed